Welcome to today's episode of Knitting with QueerJoe. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about facial hair. I know that seems like an unusual topic perhaps for a knitting blog, but recent events led me to recognize at least that I do not have the face for facial hair. So I don't know what you're working on these days, but I'm hopeful that you'll take out your project and work on that project for a little bit with me for the next few minutes while I discuss that, and also some current knitting and actually some sewing that I've been doing. So take a moment, put me on pause if you need to, go grab your project and sit down for a spell and we'll sit and knit. So today's topic is QueerJoe doesn't have the face for facial hair. Some of you may know that I've recently had a birthday. Yes, this past Saturday, I turned 61. And as part of that, and also associated with not being able to go outside the house, I thought this is a perfect opportunity, if I'm not going out and being in public, to see whether I could actually grow a beard or a mustache or both. So about a week before my birthday, I stopped shaving. And it took 6 days of not shaving before Thaddeus even noticed that I wasn't shaving. So that tells you something right off the top of the bat, that I really don't have the growth potential when it comes to facial hair to be able to create that kind of thing. And what started to come in was very gray, a lot grayer than the natural color of my hair. This is the natural color of my hair. There's quite a bit of gray in it. You can kind of see streaks of gray going through it and things like that, but it is still naturally mostly brown and without any kind of dyeing. But the facial hair, not so much. The facial hair was much more gray with dark brown streaks through it as well. It was also very coarse and very, not curly necessarily, but certainly not straight. Not quite sure how it was unwieldy. It was just not great hair. And so finally, I decided that I was going to shave on my birthday. And it was actually about 7 days into it when Thaddeus first noticed, I think. So I must have started not shaving a little bit before that even. But by the time I had gotten to that place, I don't know if any guys have ever done that, but it was incredibly itchy. And my face was kind of like rebelling at the fact that I was trying to grow hair, I think. And I think, honestly, I may actually be even allergic to my own hair, because when I did finally shave it off, I was able to, I actually had kind of hives sort of like on my face. I took a little video, but I'm not quite sure how much of it you'll be able to see in the video, but there were actually red spots on my face that were slightly raised. It was almost like a rash. And it was only from the irritation of the excess hair, the ends of the hair on my face that I had grown, that it actually kind of dug into my skin, I think. And so shaving off that extra hair left kind of an ugly little skin problem. The skin problem cleared up within like 2 or 3 days, so it wasn't that big a deal, but it made me realize that not even my face wants me to grow facial hair. And so I have 3 older brothers, and I actually have a younger brother as well. The younger brother and the older brother, one of my older brothers, has had facial hair for quite a bit, and I've never thought it looked incredibly good on them anyway. But I'm not sure whether it's because they have the same potential for facial hair as I do, or whether they just, I just don't think they look good in facial hair per se. So I found that kind of an interesting experiment while I was sequestered away at home. One of the other things that I wanted to talk about a little bit is, you might have noticed from my last episode of Knitting with QueerJoe that I've started wearing sweaters that I've made in the past. If you've been a longtime reader of Knitting with QueerJoe, the blog, you'll probably recognize some of the sweaters as they come out. The last sweater, in fact, somebody had made a comment about it, I think on the blog, was an adaptation of a sweater that I got from Marianne Isager. Marianne is a Danish, I forget where she's from. She's from Europe somewhere. And she has a book called, I think, Knitting Out of Africa. I think that's the English translation of it. Years ago, I had actually requested a copy from a friend who lives over, I think she was in Belgium, to tell you the truth. And we traded magazines. I traded American magazines for a couple Marianne Isager magazines and books that she could send me. And so it was a great trade. I got the original copy of Africa in the original language. And so that was kind of nice. And but that particular had a great stitch pattern, a stranded two-color stitch pattern that I really liked very much. So I adapted it into a pullover, and I had kind of done a color treatment on the front placket for a kind of a 3/4 zip sort of thing without a zip. And also had done something down the sleeve, which I really liked a lot. So it was a real fun project to take somebody else's design and run with it and make something that I really enjoyed a lot. This sweater that I'm wearing, this cardigan that I'm wearing, was the first sweater I ever knit. So that was 30 some odd years ago that I decided to knit the sweater. And one of the things I love about the sweater, it's an old, I think it's a pattern from an old Plymouth magazine. No, it's from I think a knitting magazine. I still have the knitting magazine, but they called for worsted weight yarn, and it's fisherman's rib type of design, and it has pockets and everything. So I actually learned to do pockets on my first sweater that I ever knit. But the thing that was funny about it was I saw it in gray, and I had very little imagination when it came to making my own sweaters. And so I went into the closest yarn store I could find, which was in Princeton, New Jersey at the time. It was called Clayton's Yarn Store, I think, if I remember right. And this incredibly snotty lady did not like having me in her store, clearly. It was one of the first times I ever experienced any kind of, I think, discrimination because I was a man in a woman's space. And so I asked her, I showed her the picture of the sweater that I wanted to make, and she said, "Oh, we don't carry that yarn." And I think it was done in an acrylic yarn. The pattern called for an acrylic yarn. And I said, "Well, okay, do you have anything like it?" And she said, "Well, no." And not knowing the difference between worsted weight yarn, for instance, and sport weight yarn, for instance, I had no idea. But I looked around the store and I was like, well, there's kind of a ton of yarn here. And she said, "Well, it's worsted weight. You could do it in any worsted weight." And I said, "Okay, can you show me some of that?" And so she ended up showing me this wool cotton blend of yarn. I can't remember the brand name of it now, but it's woolen cotton is heavier than just plain wool. Add to that this was knit flat, and it requires some purling. And my pearls, I was wrapping the wrong way when I first taught myself how to knit. So in essence, I was doing twisted knit fisherman's rib. And so that twisted fisherman's rib is a much denser fabric, and the yarn itself is a much heavier yarn than a standard worsted weight wool. And so the resulting sweater is an incredibly heavy, dense fabric sweater. I still love this sweater, and I will keep it for the rest of my life. I think it's fantastic, and it doesn't look great on me, but it's definitely warm. In fact, Thaddeus used to call it my Arctic sweater because it was so thick and strong that it would keep me warm in the Arctic. But so I am going to start wearing some of my older sweaters as I do these next episodes of Knitting with QueerJoe, so I can introduce you to some of the old-time sweaters that I've made over the past in my knitting history. The other thing that I wanted to share with you is you notice that the background is slightly different. I do have a yarn of wool. This isn't mine. This I stole, I think, from off the web from somebody's yarn store. It's the picture of somebody's yarn store and the yarn that they had in it. I probably have at least as much yarn as shows in this background photo. but I was able to use Zoom technology to record this particular episode of Knitting with QueerJoe. And Zoom allows you to customize your background. So you'll notice when I move my hand in weird sorts of way, it takes a little bit of time for it to recognize what's background and what's me. And so so you notice it looks kind of funny and stuff, but I still much prefer this to the old plain background of just a window shade or a window as it was in the last one. So there we are in terms of Knitting with QueerJoe. If you have any questions about my ability to grow facial hair, or recommendations about ways that I might be able to do that in the future. I know I'm not supposed to be doing that anyway. It's supposed to, most people decided to shave off their facial hair during a time when the virus could have been caught in facial hair, I guess, or something like that. So a lot of people shaved during this time. Well, I went the other direction and saw whether I could actually grow some, and I can't. Or if you have any questions about sweaters that you've seen in episodes of Knitting with QueerJoe, please feel free to leave those in comments on YouTube or comments on the blog, or send me a note, a message through any of the various means that you have of accessing me on my website or other places. So let's move on to current knitting. So two things that I've been working on. Since I had finished the last project that we showed on the last episode of the blog, I've been working solely on the chevron striped scarf. Sorry, this is going in and out with that strange background effect, but you get a sense about what it's looking like. The problem is I just came to, okay, I have to show you this a little closer up. So this requires a 10 stripe repeat. So it should have gone green, red, green, red, green, red, green, red 5 times for a total of 10 stripes, right? So the last stripe that I was going to be doing in red was going to be this stripe that I'm working on. I ran out of yarn. So it should have 3 more rows to create it's a 4-row stripe to create that color stripe. I think I might have some of that red. It's a Knit Picks yarn that I'm using, so it's not hard to find or order if I have to. And I think I might have some left over from an earlier project that I used this yarn for, but I'm going to have to look through my whole wall of yarn to see whether I can find the leftover red yarn for that. So since I got stopped on that, and I'm probably about 3/4 of the way finished with that project, I decided to pick up a new project, and I decided to do something completely new, something that I've never done before, kind of never done before, but I'm just starting a scarf. This is going to be a scarf, and it's going to be a zigzag stripe in 2 different colorways of yarns. And the 2 different colorways are really rather nice, I think. They're if I put them in front of me, it seems to recognize it a little bit better, so I'll do that. But it got this beautiful deep green and deep red, and it's actually got some dark grays in it as well. And then this black and gray kind of ombre sort of thing. It's actually variegated, it's not ombre at all. And those 2 are coming together in a very nice, I think, a very nice way. To create kind of zigzag stripes across the horizontal piece of the scarf. So I think that's going to come out very nice. One of the things that I mentioned in the last Knitting with QueerJoe was the fact that people a lot like when I knit things with dark and black yarns. So charcoal gray and black seem to be very nice ones. Even when I mix them with brighter, more vibrant colors, like I'm doing with this particular project, this one takes a little bit more concentration because basically what I've done is I've set it up so that the yellow stitch markers are decreases and the light blue stitch markers are increases. And so I do 2 increases, one on either side of the stitch marker, 2 decreases, one on either part of the stitch marker, or 2 increases, one on either side of the blue stitch marker, every other row. And so it's all done in garter stitch. So you'd think it would be a little bit easier, but it still does require me to know exactly where I am and which stitch marker that whether I'm on an increased stitch marker or a decreased stitch marker or a plain row to begin with. So it requires a little bit more of my attention, and so it was a little bit even hard to knit that at this part of Knitting with QueerJoe. Finally, in current knitting, and it's actually current sewing, I decided to make a couple masks so that Thaddeus and I can go out to the grocery store with 2 layers of fabric, and it's tightly woven cotton fabric that I use. I used a different side so that we can always tell which is the inside of the mask and which is the outside of the mask. And I also didn't have any elastic, so I ended up creating my own ties for this. And you can get a sense about what I look like in either side of that mask from the photos that I took of me wearing them. So that's this episode of Knitting with QueerJoe. It's kind of a short one, but hopefully it'll be an interesting one if you're stuck at home and only have me to listen to. And feel free to leave a comment on my blog, leave a comment on YouTube, like me on YouTube, subscribe, and or listen to as much of my videos as you possibly can listen to, even if it's only as background noise. I'm actually starting to make quite a bit of progress in terms of getting towards I think it's 2,000 hours of, I think I have to have 2,000 viewer hours in a 365-day period. And I'm working up towards that. So any way that you can help me to do that, that would be great. So thanks very much for joining me for this episode of Knitting with QueerJoe. Hopefully you'll get to see many more of these, and it was a pleasure spending time with you. Until the next one, please continue to knit on.